Hello, and welcome to episode 427 of the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast. My name is Seth Perrodin, historian and deputy director of the Mississippi Armed Forces Museum. And with me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, retired Navy Captain Bill Tody, former skipper of the fast attack submarine USS Indianapolis, Commodore of Submarine Squadron 3 in Pearl Harbor, and many other postings. I saw your little wave there, Bill. Sorry.
Yeah. No need for me to wave. There's only the two of us. If
True.
there's three or four people on the screen, which one is he talking about? But no, not today.
No. No. How you doing today anyway? November 20th, which is a
Mhm.
monumental day, by the way. That is the invasion of Tarawa, Operation Galvanic, the day.
That is correct, Seth. I'm doing
Mhm.
fine today. Yesterday's, we tried to record and I had technical difficulties that I finally overcame last night. Oh man, it took me 12 hours to figure out where the failure was, swapping cables, swapping cameras, swapping everything, but yeah, it
That
was stubborn, but I got there.
that is some of the most infuriating things that can possibly happen to you. And I got to say this, after all the episodes that we have recorded, I think that's only the second time that we've ever had any kind of technical difficulties at all. That's not bad.
You are correct. I was
Hmm.
counting my blessings as I was
Yeah.
dealing with that because I was saying it worked every other time. And well,
Pretty
so
good
I can't
track record.
complain.
Pretty good
That's
track
right.
record. So,
Mhm.
Bill, you had something you wanted to say about demographics on our show.
Yeah, this is so we don't folks, we aren't attention hogs. We never advertise this podcast. I have no idea why you're watching. It's it developed an audience organically, but every month or so we kind of look at it to see where it is. And I looked today, and I thought, well, maybe you all would be interested in what's going on here because I found some surprising things. They surprised me. I think they surprised Seth. Let's see if they surprise
Yes.
you. So, as of today, we're recording this on November 20th. Our channel's gotten 8,379,824 views. It's 379,824 views. That's about 8,379,823 more views than I had expected. But anyway, we're very grateful for that. But but here's what's really interesting to me: the demographics. So I'm gonna, of course, it's gonna stall out on me now. Key moments, audience retention. For some reason, the 9/11 one, people stayed that one, that episode to the end. A lot of times people, I think, bail and then come back. So that
Mhm.
skews the demographics. If they watch it for an hour in one of our 9-hour episodes, but then they come back and then continue where they were and watch it for the other hour and so on and so forth, it skews it downward. It makes it look like people are watching for a shorter period of time. But this is kind of interesting, Seth. No surprise that the United States is our number one audience, right? Um, no surprise that people who like us also like Drachenfell
Mhm.
or Times Radio History. No surprise there. No surprise also that let's see, it looks like 46% of our audience is age 65 and older. Yeah, they're retired and they have the time required to watch 2-hour episodes. But I will say that's been shifting left to younger.
Yeah,
When we
I
first
saw that.
started, it was like in the 60 to 70% were 65 years. And now it's down to 46%, which I'm very, I'm happy. I'm happy whoever watches, right? Um, okay, and I lost it. So here
I
we go.
would I wouldn't necessarily say that it's down. I just think we're getting more viewers of a younger age, so it's spreading it out some more. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah, exactly what I meant. So now this is Lifetime again. The really interesting thing from my standpoint is nations. Number one nation is, no surprise, the United States. Number two, our friends down under, the
Mhm.
Aussies. Okay. Number three, Canada. That surprised me, Seth, because Canada's not a very populous country. Number 4, United Kingdom. Number 5, you want to take a guess on number 5?
Japan.
No,
No?
Philippines.
Oh,
6
okay.
is
No, that makes
Germany.
sense. That makes sense.
Yeah, 6 is Germany. 7 is Japan. 8, our friends down in New Zealand.
Hmm.
9, Netherlands. 10, Vietnam. 11, Thailand. A
Hmm.
lot of Asia Pacific countries. Not
Makes
surprising
sense.
there.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we have 48 countries represented. The lowest rated is Peru. Right above there is the UAE, then Slovenia. That would be Melania Trump's family, I guess. Then Bangladesh, more people from Bangladesh than Slovenia, Portugal, Laos. I'm going from the bottom up. Um, so this is pretty cool. I mean, we've got folks in Myanmar or Burma,
Burma.
Argentina, Czech, Russia, Belgium, Greece, South Korea, Switzerland, Cambodia, Malaysia, Italy. I've heard from some of the folks in Italy. This is just really cool. How about
It is
cities,
cool.
Seth?
It is cool.
Number 1 city. You'll never get it.
New York.
No.
Really?
Nope. Chicago.
Chicago,
Number
Illinois. Okay.
Chicago, Illinois. What the heck?
Well, there's a lot of
Number
folks in
2,
Chicago.
yeah. Number 2, Sydney.
Really?
Sydney, Australia. I never would have figured that.
Neither me.
Why? I'm again very grateful to the folks
Oh,
down
yeah.
under, but that was interesting. I guess that's enough time spent on that.
That's pretty
Um,
cool.
the number 1 episode, of course, is The Night the Giants Rode, the
Mm.
Naval Battle of Guadalcanal. Number 2, Carrier Raids on Rabaul. Number 3, Air Battle of Formosa.
Yeah.
That surprises me. I've got
That,
to go all the way. Go ahead.
no, I was going to say, that the Formosa episode doesn't surprise me, and I'm happy because it's something that people don't know about,
Yeah,
and I
yeah,
mean
that's
that
right.
episode we went into the weeds in that one, and that does my heart good to see that one, especially because of the fact that that's not something that people talk about, and like we said in the beginning or part of that episode that's I kind of relate that to being the unofficial opening of the Battle of Lady Gulf. And it all coincides with everything else that happens after it, And I'm glad that people are listening to that or
Hmm.
watching it or whatever the hell, because they're learning something that I got to admit. Look, I'm going to be 100% clear. When we're writing these and doing all these things, yeah, I mean, I know about them, but I don't know all these details. So there was a lot of things on each episode, with the exception of this one. But with each episode when I'm writing and researching and everything, I learn something new every time because I mean, there's,
Hmm.
because some of these things like this, Formosa, is not something that people talk about often, and yet it's hugely important. And I think the one that I would like to see more hits on, if anybody's watching and they're looking for something to listen to, is Halsey's raid in the South China Sea. Because,
Hmm.
again, we went into that in deep, deep detail. That was just me and you. And that had huge implications for the rest of the war and,
That's right.
Japan's tanker or lack thereof issues after that raid. It's incredible. So if you haven't watched that one, go watch that one because that's going to blow your mind, man, because there's some serious stuff that goes
Mhm.
on there that, again, you don't know about, I guarantee you.
Absolutely true. One last thing I'll hit, and then we could get on to today's topic is gender. So any surprise, 94% male? No, 6% female. However, when we first started, we were pushing to get, I mean, it's below 2% female for a
Mhm.
long time. So I'm really glad to see our female viewers um, getting more interested. And I suspect it's because they have family members who were in the war and they just want to learn more.
Either that or because of your persona and your presence, Bill.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Well, that would go first. Okay. All
Goodness
right,
gracious.
enough of that.
All right.
Yeah. Oh, the
Well,
one
let's.
one thing that does hurt my soul though is you have to go all the way down to number 12, Seth,
Mhm.
before you see the first submarine episode in
Hmm.
popularity, and that's the Dick
Really?
O'Kane episode. Yeah, I
Hmm.
was hoping the submarine episodes would be doing better than that, but
We
Here
got
we
some more
are.
sub stuff coming. We got some more sub
We
stuff
do.
coming. So
Right.
indeed, and some good ones too. So, all right. Well, on to today's topic. Here we go. The hot spot, the graveyard shift, Death Valley, the Destroyer Graveyard, Purple Heart Corner, and my favorite, Bogey Boulevard. All of these and more were nicknames for their destination. Radar Picket Station number 1, northeast of Okinawa, was the absolute worst place on planet Earth to be if you were a United States Navy sailor in the early to middle part of April 1945. Ship after ship after ship had been mauled at Picket Station number 1. USS Cassin Young DD-793 had gotten it on the 12th. USS Purdy DD-734 got hammered on the same day. 2 other American ships had been obliterated at Radar Picket Station 1 since then. The oceanic bullseye that was Radar Picket Station number 1 was quite literally the last place any American sailor wanted to be. Yet to Radar Picket Station number 1 they would go. Picket 1 was vital to the protection of the invasion fleet that was anchored off of Okinawa's shores. Closest to Japan than any of the other stations, Radar Picket 1 provided the earliest warning of any inbound Japanese kamikaze strikes. Being the closest, it was also the first to be attacked, hence the reputation. The destroyer was cruising slowly off the coast of Okinawa when she received the dispatch. Lieutenant Theodore Runk, the ship's communication officer, read the dispatch and groaned. Instead of handing the dispatch to an enlisted man to bring to the ship's captain, Runk decided to hand deliver this one to the CO. As he entered the captain's sea cabin, Runk said, quote, "Captain, this is one I would rather not give you," unquote. As he read the dispatch, the captain said quietly, "Yes, Ted, I see what you mean." The dispatch contained an order for that no destroyer skipper ever wanted to see, orders to Picket 1. Digesting the order, the ship's captain, one F. Julian Becton, knew what awaited his ship. He had seen the hulks of the other destroyers that had been assigned to Picket 1 with his own eyes at Karamaretto. Torn, shattered hulks of ships with guns pointing in crazy directions, huge holes torn in their side, mangled decks and twisted mounts, and of course, bodies wrapped in white sheets awaiting burial were visual evidence of the horror that was his and his ship's destination. Captain Becton later said, quote, "I had a sort of tingling sensation up my back and across my scalp. It had come at last, just as I knew it would sooner or later. The order said for me to go to Karamaretto and pick up Cassin Young's FDO. That meant only one thing. Laffey was being assigned to a station on the radar picket line. The gates of hell awaited us," unquote. It sounds dramatic, Bill, but it ain't. It ain't.
No, Seth, this is incredible. This is a story I had not heard, until, frankly, until you raised the issue with me, right? I know about the picket stations, but the
Sure.
story of this ship, incredible. And the story of this captain, could there be a worse luck captain in the war? I don't know, but you're going to have to listen to the end of this episode to find out. All right.
This guy
So
was
this is
he was
Laffey.
amazing.
He was, yeah. DD-724 had a proud name and legacy to live up to. DD-724 was the second American destroyer to be named after the Civil War Medal of Honor recipient Bartlett Laffey. The first Laffey was DD-459. It was a veteran of the early Pacific War. That Benson-class destroyer had seen more than her fair share of action off of Guadalcanal, fighting at Cape Esperance. Go back and listen to that episode. It's a good one. That was in October of 42. October 42, right? She ultimately met her fate on Friday the 13th. It's another good episode. In the barroom brawl, after having dueled with battleship Hiei and 2 other Japanese ships at ranges of 20 feet and a shade more, Laffey had her stern blown off by a Japanese long lance torpedo shortly before her boilers exploded, sinking her immediately. One of the men who witnessed Laffey's sinking was the XO of USS Aaron Ward, a young lieutenant commander named F. Julian Becton, the man we're talking about today. More on him shortly. So, Seth, how often did we name a new ship after one that had just been sunk?
It was fairly common, honestly. And I mean, if you look back at the roster of American ships, I mean, hell, just look at aircraft carriers. Yorktown, Lexington,
Mm,
Hornet,
mm.
Wasp. Those are all
Right.
early war carriers that get sunk, and we've got
Hmm.
Essex carriers named after them. The same is true for cruisers and destroyers, especially destroyers. And as we all know, those destroyers, they took a heavy, heavy toll in the waters off Guadalcanal, and this is no different.
Hmm.
So it's an old
Of
Navy
course, my
tradition. Bill, you know
submarine,
about this. Yeah,
we always was USS Indianapolis, right? So go
exactly.
ahead.
No, I was going to say, you know more about this than I do. I mean, it's an old Navy tradition that if a ship, especially a battle-hardened ship, with a very good record goes down, the Navy wants to honor that ship by naming a new ship the same name. It's christening a new
Hmm.
ship in the same name to carry on that tradition. And this is no different here. This Laffey, DD-724, was laid down in Bath, Maine in 1943. She was a new Allen M. Sumner class destroyer. She was absolutely state of the art when she was commissioned on February 8th, 1944. Um, the Sumners were seen as an improvement over the Fletcher class, which is hard to believe because the Fletcher class were and are amazing, amazing destroyers. I mean, they were the workhorses of not just the Pacific, but the Atlantic too, but especially the Pacific. But like we've talked about before, anytime the military brings a new piece of equipment into the fray, that piece of equipment's replacement is already on the drawing board, or at the very
Hmm.
least, are already being laid down in terms of a ship. That's just the way things go, and this is no different. The Sumner class, and we talked about them last week, but just in case you missed that episode, we're going to talk about them again because they are different. They're significantly different. They have more guns. They sport twin 5-inch 38s in three mounts. 12 40 millimeter Bofors and two quads and four double mounts, as well as 11 or more 20 millimeter Ehrlichs. The Sumners were built essentially for fleet AAA defense. They were extremely fast, achieving 35 knots or more if the skippers really bent it on, and could turn on a dime because they had dual rudders. They were 15 feet longer than the Fletchers, with a 20% increase in armaments in terms of 5-inch weaponry and 50% more AAA. The Sumner class were built to kill Japanese aircraft. Obviously, they do other things. Destroyers do everything, but
Hmm.
they were built to kill aircraft, Bill.
Yeah. So from bow to stern, Laffey's gun armament was as follows: Mount 51, which was a twin 5-inch 38. Mount 52, just after 51, which is another twin 5-inch 38, superimposed over, right? Kind of, there we go. My hands don't work that way. Mount 51, two 20 millimeter Ehrlichs were on each side of the forward superstructure groups 21 and 22. A twin 40 millimeter Bofors mount, and that's a twin 40 millimeter, was on each side of the forward stack, mounts 41 and 42. Four stand for 40 millimeter. Two 20 millimeter guns were on the port side of the aft stack, that's group 24. Two 20 millimeters were on the starboard side of the aft deck house, that's group 23. Two quad 40 millimeter mount Bofors were on top of the aft deck house, staggered starboard, that's mount 43, and port mount 44, even starboard, odd port. So both mounts could train to either side or aft. Mount 53, which is another twin 5-inch 38, was aft of the deckhouse. Three 20 millimeter guns, group 25, were on the fantail in a triangular arrangement between Mount 53 and the depth charge racks on the stern. This ship was ready for war, Seth.
And why are we going into these specific mounts? Groups 21, 22, Mount 44, all this other jazz. You're going to know why once we get to the action part of this episode, because that's how we're going to refer to these mounts because of the action that takes place there. It's a little easier to distinguish what happens when things go to hell, and they do go to hell. So like Bill was saying, Laffey was ready for war. She was initially assigned to the Atlantic Theater, which is pretty cool, really. Again, being born in Bath, Maine, she goes to the Atlantic Fleet and she does some action out there. She serves initially as a convoy escort and then prepares for Operation Overlord, the invasion of France. Of course, D-Day, everybody knows that. Offshore in Normandy, Laffey provided gunfire support off a Utah beach and screened the fleet for German E-boats, which is essentially the German version, but significantly different, but similar in terms of task as a
mission.
PT boat. Yeah. So on June the 12th, Laffey pursued German E-boats, which had attacked and torpedoed some ships nearby. She returned to England for replenishment. She arrived off Cherbourg and bombarded German positions, receiving a hit from a shore battery during that time. Her time in the Atlantic was very, very short because, frankly, that's not where she was needed. She was needed in the Pacific. And on July the 9th, she headed for Boston for refit and a trip to the Broad Blue, seeing extensive action in the Philippines from November through the end of January, or through the end of 1944. Laffey then screened ships in Task Force 58 and provided gunfire support during Iwo Jima. Then she maintained an almost constant presence off of Okinawa. So this thing, Bill, like a lot of these, she was built in 43 and commissioned in 44. So you kind of like, I guess you could call her a mid-war ship. She saw a
Mhm.
ton of action before the action she's really famous for. So, I mean, this thing was not some Johnny come lately. She was not a green crew by any means, was she?
And she never got a break. I mean, if there's
No.
action anywhere here, she's there. This crew
Mm.
is ridden hard, and not green by any means. So well-trained crew or gunners were a confident bunch with plenty of skins on the wall. Gunner's mate Larry Delusky said, "We were not blind or stupid. We knew we were heading where we were heading, and we knew we had to be at our very best. We could handle it." Laffey was ready for what might lay ahead. Her crew were almost to a man plank owners. That means they were on board when the ship was commissioned. So they were with her from the very beginning. They trusted each other, they knew each other, and they trusted their officers. They had been well trained and they knew it. They also knew that they owed much of their preparation to one man. We've mentioned him already, Seth. Where's this guy from?
He's born in D'Arc, Arkansas in 1908. His name was Frederick Julian Becton. He was a graduate of your alma mater, Bill, class of
Mhm.
1931, Annapolis. Becton served aboard battleships, destroyers, later cruisers. He was strictly a SWO. He was a surface warfare officer, never had any desire to dip his toes in the submarines or aviation. He was a surface warrior. Following sea service, he goes back to Annapolis to teach marine engineering before being sent back to sea in 1940 as engineering officer on USS Gleaves, which is a early destroyer, DD-423. Soon afterwards, he was assigned to USS Aaron Ward, which is what you were talking about just a minute ago, DD-483 as her executive officer. As mentioned earlier, he had been the executive officer on Aaron Ward during the same battle in which the first Laffey was lost. During that battle, two Japanese long lance torpedoes passed under Aaron Ward without exploding before she hit destroyer Akatsuki, which blew up and sank, and before getting hit 9 times and returning going dead in the water. Aaron Ward, this is. And nearly being hit the next morning by main battery fire from Japanese battleship Hiei, as Hiei was crippled and just kind of languishing before we put her down. Aaron Ward suffered 15 dead and 57 wounded during the barroom brawl incident. Following the canal, Julian Becton took command of Aaron Ward when on April 7th, 1943, she was bombed and sunk by 6 Japanese Val-Die bombers while defending a convoy off of Guadalcanal. Despite valiant efforts and attempts by her crew to save her, she sank with a loss of 27 killed or missing and 59 wounded. Now, Bill Becton, and it's important to note we're talking about this guy because every man, I knew a lot of guys on Laffey, and they all pointed to one guy as the reason for their survival, and it's Becton, because Becton, unlike his crew when he took command of Laffey, he had been around the block. He had seen a ton of action. He was highly decorated too, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. So he gets Aaron Ward sunk out from below him as the skipper, and he was awarded his first 4 silver stars as the operations
Or
officer for
Silver
Des
Stars.
4, right, as the ops officer on Des Ron 21, embarked on the destroyer Nicholas DD-449 during the battles of Kula Gulf, Kolobangara, and other night actions in the Central Solomon Islands between the 5th and 13th of July and the 7th and 18th of August 1943. Becton was ingrained with a deep sense of loyalty to his men and they to him. Many of the younger members of the crew looked at Becton, who was only 36. I took command when I was 39. He's 36, as a father figure. And they call the skipper the old man. How do you like being called the old man when you're 36 years old? I didn't like it when I was 39. I'm 67 now. You can call me the old man now. But at 39, it wasn't good. It didn't feel good. Becton was stern but fair and fiercely loyal. He honed Laffey into an efficient and deadly fighting machine. He was also appreciative of history and tradition. Having seen with his own eyes the first Laffey go down at Guadalcanal, he vowed that this new Laffey would live up to her predecessor's legacy as a fighting ship. You know, it's a John Paul Jones, right? Give me a fast ship, for I intend to go in harm's way. That was my submarine's motto, by the way. And that's the way this guy's thinking. Becton and Laffey had nothing to prove by April 1945, but he would never back down from the pledge he made when he became Laffey's commanding officer. He and Laffey's crew would prove that in spades soon enough, Seth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the dude was. I mean, I never knew. He retires, to spoiler alert, as a rear admiral. I never knew Becton by any means, but again, going back to what I said, I knew a lot of guys on Laffey, including Larry Dulesky that you talked about a minute ago, and a guy we're going to talk about here in a little while, Ari Fatridis. Man, they all thought the world of this guy. I mean, they worshipped the ground that man walked on, and that's always a good sign when you got your blue jackets that think you hung the moon. That's a sign of a good leader for sure.
That's right.
So word spread around Laffey like an avgas fire. Picket Station number 1, quartermaster second class, the man I just talked about, Ari Futridis. His battle station was on the bridge of Laffey, tied to the hip of Commander Becton. When Ari heard about the orders to picket number 1, he rolled his eyes and later told me, quote, "It wasn't a matter of whether or not we would get hit. We knew we would get hit. It was a question of how many and how bad it would be. And everybody else felt the same way," unquote. That's never a good feeling, Bill, when you know you're going into the lion's den and it's not a question of whether you're going to get hit. It's a matter of when and how bad. That gonna lay heavy on the crew, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, this is good. That was a good metaphor, Seth. It's kind of like going into the Coliseum as a gladiator.
Yeah.
You're going to
Yeah.
get injured. Something's going to happen. There's no way you're coming out of this, you know, unscathed. You're going to be scathed. So other sailors felt differently, though. TM2, torpedoman second class John Schneider said, "We thought we might break the jinx of that station." You know, he figured, if any ship breaks the jinx, it's going to be us. Schneider was not in the majority, however, and other sailors said, "We knew we'd eventually go up there. We had seen the ships that came back, so we knew we were going to be in real trouble. We figured we were probably going to get hit." As Laffey pulled into what the sailors called Busted Bay, this is at Gromaretto, right? The hulks of burned and blackened ships, all kamikaze victims, were everywhere. Becton said it was a depressing sight, a little scary too. It went on and on until it felt you were moving down the aisle in the middle of a hospital ward full of mangled and crippled casualties. Ship casualties. This is a hospital ward for ships. Grotesque patterns of superstructures dotted the anchorages. Mattresses, loaves of bread, clothing, and other detritus floated in the oil-slicked water around Gromaretto. Holes in the ship's hulls were plugged with mattresses, and flags were flown at half-mast as crews buried their dead in private ceremonies on each ship. Small boats crisscrossed the water, bringing doctors and corpsmen to damaged ships that had just pulled in. Wounded, streams of them, many horribly burned, lay in long lines on stretchers, on decks, and ashore. Bows of ships were gone, sterns missing, superstructures wiped out, gun mounts gone, literally gone. 5-inch gun barrels twisted at crazy angles, bridges on ships wiped out, collapsed sides, scorched decks, holes everywhere. It was macabre and fascinating in a gruesome kind of way, Seth.
Yeah. If you see any of the pictures, and I'll put a few of them up as you're describing this when I do the post editing here, Bill, I mean, what, what you just described is 100% accurate. I mean, there are images of some of these DDs that come in and their superstructures, the bridge is freaking gone. I mean, there is nothing
Mhm.
there, or it's like, flipped back like this. I mean, they are just hammered. And I mean, again, you already know you're going into the lion's den and you see evidence of what can happen, probably will happen to you with your own two beady little eyes. That's gonna that's going to lay heavy on the old chest. So Laffey pulls up alongside Cass and Young, USS Cass and Young, to grab the FDO team, which consisted of a Lieutenant E.L. Mulpus, Lieutenant Vance Poirier.
Or I
There
don't
we
know.
go. God bless him. I'm sorry if his name, his
Yeah.
relatives are listening, and three enlisted men. After getting the FDO team aboard, Laffey filled her magazines, and she would need them. Filled to capacity and then some, the 5-inch rounds and 40s were literally everywhere aboard the ship. Cass and Young CEO Commander J.W. Isles told Becton, quote, make as much speed as you can, shoot as fast as you can, and duck. You have a fighting chance, but they will keep on coming till they get you. Those are very prophetic words, Bill.
Yeah. Seth, I've gone to see it many times in my submarine career where we knew we were going to be out a long time and we had crates of food lining the passageway. We were
Mhm.
walking on the food because we knew we needed the food. They were doing this with ammunition.
With
They were
ammunition, yeah.
all over the place because they're going to take every round they possibly can. So they get underway under crystal clear skies. They leave Kuramaretto bound for Picket Station 1 on April 14, 1945. She arrived a short time later, some 30 miles north of the tip of Okinawa. It's not far. And
Mhm.
relieved the destroyer mine layer USS J. William Ditter, DM 31. As the two ships passed, Becton conversed with Ditter's CO, who was an old friend. Ditter's CO was a Commander Roy Sampson, and he told Becton via TBS, talk between ships, that they had gotten lucky. They hadn't even seen a kamikaze in their time on station. Becton hoped that he would have the same luck, but in his heart he knew that would not be the case.
Mhm.
Already on radar picket station number 1 were two large support landing craft, LCSL 51, commanded by Lieutenant Howell D. Chickering, and LCSL 116, commanded by Lieutenant A.J. Wierzbicki. We're screwing this up today, Seth. I'm
Trying.
sorry if a member of the family is listening. I'm so sorry. The 160-foot LCSL was an adaptation of the infantry landing craft LCI with an additional 40 millimeter fore and aft and 20 millimeter guns and 50 caliber machine guns, along with two high capacity pumps that enabled it to act as fire and rescue craft.
Mhm.
Once on station, Becton spoke to his crew. He could feel their uneasy nature and he said, quote, you've tangled with this kind before and come out on top. We're going to outmaneuver and outshoot them. We are going to go down, they are going to go down, but we are not. I have the utmost confidence in you. Just remember, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. If we do that, I assure you that the Japanese will wish they had never heard of USS Laffey. Those are good words, Seth,
They
but
are.
I'm
Yeah, they
not
are.
sure they put much starch in the backbones bones of those guys that knew what they were up
Yeah.
against.
So Becton later said, quote, I knew the men were nervous and worried. They had been through previous uninterrupted sleep. Many men were exhausted from days of strain and effort and from constantly being on alert. Yet I knew these men of mine would do exactly what I said we would do once things got started, unquote. Within an hour of arriving on station, quote, things got started, unquote. Three bogies appeared on radar and Laffey tracked them. At that time, the station did not have any combat air patrol, but radar picket station number 3 had a quartet of fighters at their disposal. Laffey went to GQ and requested the combat air patrol. Her fighter director team coached the fighters onto the target. Within a few minutes, all three bogies had been shot down. About an hour after the first contact, Laffey's radar picked up another batch of bogeys, this time 8. Well out of range, Becton could only watch the aerial scrum unfold via the radar screen. Again, within minutes, Cap had eliminated the 8-plane team of Japanese intruders. Becton said of the first encounters, quote, "It was unreal. We were on the edge before we got out there, and now this. All of the enemy planes had been shot down, and Laffey never fired a shot. Nor did we have to open fire for the rest of the day and night that followed," unquote. It would not last, however. The next day,
I wouldn't. Yeah, go
no,
ahead.
it's certain it would certainly would not. The next day, a fleet newspaper, and these kind of things are passed around, via radio essentially, and then mimeographed and sent to the ship. Bill, tell us about what goes through this newspaper. It's rather humorous, but gallows
Yeah,
humor.
so as you said, Seth, it's copied, passed around the ship. It contained more news and general comments about the situation at Okinawa. One of the editorials was a riff on the popular tune called Blues in the Night. Seth, this is a really good song.
It is.
And it's not surprising that sailors would write alternative lyrics to a really good popular song. So these alternative lyrics read, "Did you sleep well at night? Do you keep hearing bells ringing? Do you keep seeing things flying around in the dark and flashes before your eyes? You do? Don't worry. You aren't sick. And it isn't Pinkoff's coffee, it's the general alarm. Bogies in the night." I'm not going to sing it, Seth, but those were the lyrics that they wrote. But if you stop hearing bells and seeing flashes and things flying, that's when something is the matter with you. You is dead. Seth, this is gallows humor at its finest.
It really is. It really is. And you got to do something to break the tension. And that's certainly
Mhm.
one of the things that usually does that very type of thing. So the night of April 15th, 16th, 1945, for Laffey was relatively uneventful, if not restless, Bill. Japanese snoopers flew in and out of radar picket station number one's airspace all night long. They were outside of gun range, so there's nothing Laffey could do. And what the Japanese, of course, are doing is they are searching for and finding USS Laffey and her friends. Becton knew it, and so did the entire crew, because every time the radar screens light up, the ship goes to GQ. And every single time that would happen, the entire crew is awake and they're at their battle stations doing their thing. The final alarm rang at 0300. And for the remainder of the night, or what was left of it, which in this time of year in the Pacific, there ain't much darkness left, the crew slept. Ari Fatridis, my old friend, said, and I quote, "When I went to sleep that night, I knew we were going to be attacked tomorrow." Everyone knew it, and nobody slept that night, Bill.
Yeah, there's tactics, it's like playing football. You keep hitting them, and wear them out, and then you get one through, then the fullback is able to penetrate the line. That's the kind of thing that's going on here. Kikusui number 3 was planned for April 16th by the Japanese. Japanese Ugaki Matome, call sign, what were we calling them?
The poetic tool.
Poetic Tool. Poetic Tool. Yeah, call sign Poetic Tool. I'm pretty sure that's what his friends called him. Planned a multi-level attack for that day. Fighter sweeps on Okinawan airfields occurred during the early morning hours, and after that, he had 165 kamikaze aircraft slated for suicide runs on Allied ships off of Okinawa. By 0400, 58 special attack aircraft lifted off from Kagoshima under Ugaki's watchful eye. Aboard Laffey, the morning dawned bright and clear. The seas calm, very calming, but it's a kind of a harbinger of things to come. Visibility was perfect. It was both good and bad for both sides, of course. On the ship's bridge, Commander Becton paced and kept his eyes skyward. He too had been kept awake by the snoopers from last night, and he too was on edge. Above the ship, 3 divisions of F-4U Corsairs from USS Intrepid VF-10 prowled the skies. Almost as soon as they arrived over Laffey, these aircraft were vectored north to intercept the leading elements of Ugaki's flight. But this is just 3 divisions of airplanes, Seth,
Mhm.
trying to intercept how many Japanese?
100 and would you say 165 Japanese kamikaze air and there's other that's just the kamikazes.
Yeah,
There's other aircraft in there
right.
as you know that are conventional strikers as well. So yeah, VF-10
Mhm.
and these are the Grim Reapers of Santa Cruz fame and Phil C fame, obviously under different leadership, flying different birds. But yeah, these guys are going out there to intercept these Japanese. So Laffey had been at GQ yet again since 0500. Her men were as ready as they could be for anything that may come their way. At 0808, Laffey's radar screen lights up. The radar operator's eyes bulged at what he saw. Blips are all across the screen as Ugaki's wave of Kikasui number 3 rolled in over the fleet. Becton asked how many aircraft were on the screen, and the reply was, quote, a bunch, sir, too many to
Mhm.
count, unquote.
Yeah, that's a metric bunch,
Yes,
not an
that
imperial bunch. Right.
mm-mm, mm-mm. Becton immediately rings up flank speed and prepared for evasive maneuvers while simultaneously requesting the combat air support from the now departed F-4Us. The Grim Reapers were at this time heavily engaged and could not break away. Thus, FM-2 Wildcats, or as somebody put in the comment, the Wilder Cat, from USS Shamrock Bay, CVE 84, were launched and vectored towards Laffey. While help was on the way, Becton knew that it would take time for the fighters to arrive. And by then, unfortunately, it might be too late, Bill.
Yeah. So by 0830, one single Val dive bomber appeared on the horizon. Laffey's main battery opened fire, and the enemy plane dropped its bomb in the sea and ran. Clearly conducting recon, Becton knew that more would follow very soon. Within minutes, 4 more Vals appeared on the horizon, and Laffey took them under fire as well. These Vals, now some 17 miles out and closing Becton, called his now airborne Combat Air Patrol and brought them into the fight. The Combat Air Patrol chased the intruders, which was exactly what the Japanese wanted them to do. Now devoid of any air cover, Laffey was on her own. Her radar operator called Becton to look at the radar screen. Becton later said that the radar screen had so many blips on it that it looked like it had an advanced case of chicken pox. At a quick count, Becton counted at least 50 aircraft heading towards radar picket station number 1. He instantly called the chief engineer and yelled, "Give us all you got." This is one of those things where Captain Kirk says, "Scotty, I want flank speed now, Scotty." Um,
Mhm.
and that's not good. Yes, I actually once responded to my captain with Scotty's accent when he asked for more power, and it did not go down well for me. I'm afraid, Seth.
So 4 more Vals now approach Laffey on from her bow. The quartet and you're going to see this throughout this episode and throughout really most kamikaze attacks. Most of them, when they involve more than one aircraft, are coordinated attacks, and this is exactly what's happening here. The quartet of Vals now break off into 2 separate sections and approach the ship from each side, almost like a hammer and anvil attack with torpedoes. They're doing the same thing with kamikaze aircraft. With the combat air patrol now engaged and far away, Laffey had to rely on her speed, maneuverability, and firepower, of which she has in spades. Becton turned his destroyer so as to bring her forward mounts to bear on the pair of valves coming in from her port bow, while the ship's aftermount engaged the pair coming in from her starboard. So now he's got 2 of them coming in, or 2 pair coming in like this at him, and he swings that bad boy to the side. So all his big guns can engage these things as far away as possible to keep them the hell off of them. So Mount 51 and 52. This is why Bill went into the descriptions of those mounts, because this is how we're going to refer to them. Mount 51 and 52 took the port side pair under fire and dropped the first valve at a range of 9,000 yards. The second valve fell at 3,000 yards. Astern, gunner's mate and mount captain, my old friend Larry Dulesky, stood with his head popping out of the turret. Quote, I could see better that way, he said. Dulesky, hey, you do what you got to do, brother.
Yeah.
Dulesky's Mount 53 took the starboard pair under fire and dropped the first one with a VT fuse at 3,000 yards. As the fourth and final valve approached, it was taken under fire from Mount 53 and LCS 51. The fire from both vessels tore into the old Val and it tumbled into the water roughly 5,000 yards from the destroyer. As the fourth plane tumbled into the sea, the men at their guns on Laffey let out a huge cheer. 4 for 4 so far, Bill, and the day has just begun.
Yeah, it does. So through the initial chaos, your friend Ari Fatridis stood beside Becton and wished he could have had some of the skipper's nerve. He said, I quote, I was scared as hell that in that first wave, almost to the point of shaking. And we just stood there and he just stood there like a rock, calm as ever, giving orders and driving his ship like a master. And he was a master, Seth. As
Yeah,
soon
it
as the
was.
first attackers were brought down, the sky in front of Laffey darkened with Japanese aircraft. Just look at those bastards, shouted a gunner in one of Laffey's 40mm mounts. They had yet to open fire as Laffey's 5-inch 38s had taken the first quartet down, but they would soon have their chance. As soon as the last airplane cartwheeled into the water, brought down by Delusky's Mount 53 and the LCS, two more bandits began their run on the ship. These were two Judy dive bombers, much faster than the old Vals that they had just dropped. One Judy approached Laffey from her starboard side and closed fast. The plane was coming in low and straight, allowing the forward 40mm mount to take it under fire. Laffey's 40s just behind the aft funnel and her 20s under the command of Lieutenant Youngquist could also open fire on the plane. Seth, so you got every gun opening up at this point.
Indeed, indeed. The 40s opened up first, obviously, because they got the longer range. There, and if you've ever seen a Bofors mount fire, they fire from 4 round clips, and these are clips. They're not magazines. These are clips. These are 4 round exactly, and the feeders and the loaders are literally just dropping these things in one after the next, after the next, after the next, after the next. So these 40s are just chewing through these 4 round clips as fast as these guys are dropping them in there. As the plane continued to close at a very high rate of speed, the 20s now open up as well. All of Laffey's guns on her starboard side were firing by the time the plane was within 3,000 yards. Pieces of it are flying off, and suddenly the plane dropped. The pilot probably hit by something that's coming at him, probably dead. Seconds later, Laffey's port side galleries opened fire on the other Judy, now less than a half a mile away. This Judy opened fire on the ship as it came in, spraying the gunners in their mounts as he closed. Ari Fatridis saw the plane coming in and tried to get Lieutenant Runk, this is the gentleman that we talked about who handed the orders to Becton at the very beginning. He tried to get his attention by yelling at him because there's so much noise, there's no way that Runk can hear him. So Ari turned around and smacked him on the back, which is something an enlisted man most certainly should not do to an officer. But it worked because Runk turns around and looks at what the hell's going on, and Fatridis just points at the airplanes coming in because Runk was busy taking care of the anti-aircraft guns. He didn't even see the damn plane. He ducked, and just as he ducked some behind one of the steel plates, bullets splattered all around the bridge and just missed him. If Runk had been standing there, he most certainly would have been hit. At the same time, Becton is whipping Laffey into a tight right turn to avoid the closing airplane. This one is another Judy. It's the sixth plane to attack Laffey, was now under fire from Dulesky's Mount 53, which bracketed the target. Now closing to within less than 60 seconds before impact, all guns on the port side and Mount 53 began tearing into the Judy, but it kept on coming. Becton turned his ship again to avoid, and as he did, the airplane just simply disappeared. Boom, gone. An obvious direct hit, probably from Dulesky's Mount 53, vaporizing the plane and its pilot. And I want to make a quick note to this, Bill, before I hand off the
Mm-hmm.
narrative to you. This action is happening so hot and heavy and so fast that it is almost impossible to. So if somebody's going to say, no, this one hit first and this one came in from this side first, look, I took the AAR, I took Sam Cox's narrative, I took Becton's own narrative and the memories of all the guys that I knew and tried to compile it into one gel. And it's very difficult to say which plane came in. After the first two or three, It's very
Hmm.
difficult to say because things are happening all over the place. And that's something you got to remember is that, when guys are saying this happened here and this shell hit here, it's happening all over the damn place. It was utter chaos, Bill. Utter chaos.
Yeah, it was in final analysis. It doesn't really matter
No, it
what the
doesn't.
order and the sequence was, right? What we know is what actually hit, right? What actually happened. And that's what matters. So unfortunately, the Judy's bomb did not explode when the plane was hit. And it entered the water and exploded close aboard. The explosion showered her port side with shrapnel and also took out Laffey's SG surface search radar, as well as several antennae. Several crewmen on the port side were wounded, but none were fatal so far. After this startling end to the last plane, there was a short lull in the action. For the next 7 minutes, Laffey's men attended to their wounded and brought more ammunition to the 20s and 40s. Their fight wasn't over by a long shot, as the men could see with their own eyes the stacks of enemy airplanes lining up on them. The break ended at 0839 when another Val approached broad on Laffey's port bow. The seventh plane to attack Laffey hugged the water as Becton swung his ship to starboard at flank speed to keep his guns on the target. The Japanese pilot altered his course a bit as his target kept shifting position. Harry Fatridis watched as the plane skidded farther aft as Becton kept turning his ship. The starboard 40s and 20s opened fire on the plane as it bored in, now less than 100 yards away. Becton continued his turn, but the pilot steadied his course and came in. At Mount 53, Larry Delusky normally would have had his head out of the top of the turret so he could see better. But he had just gone inside the mount to help clear a stoppage in one of the weapons. As he did, the valve grazed the top of his turret, exactly where his head would have been, demolishing the mount's hatch cover and spraying the area with flaming avgas, causing minor fires on the ship's stern. But it continued, didn't it, Seth?
Oh yeah, man. It hadn't even begun yet. At 0843, yet another plane came in. This time, this is number 8 to attack Laffey. Still afire astern, Laffey made an attractive target as the Judy bored in. Coming in from starboard now, the 40s and 20s opened fire while Becton again whipped Laffey around to bring all of his guns on the starboard side to bear. Laffey's 5-inch 38s were still trained to port, so the smaller guns had to take this attacker on alone. As the plane closed, the 40 millimeter mounts depressed their weapons to the point where they could no longer drop them. So this thing is coming in at wave top height. Less than 200 yards away now, the plane disintegrated midair, likely due to its bomb being hit with American fire. Minor damage from the plane's fragments scattered around the starboard side as the gunners on that side of the ship let out a raucous cheer. 8 for 8. 8 for 8. Laffey had yet to sustain any serious damage. Yes, she was a fire on her stern, but this is minor fires. That would not last, however, Bill. They came in thick and fast after that, Becton wrote many, many years later.
Yeah. So above Laffey, Harry Fatridis noted that the Japanese planes circled like buzzards, almost waiting their turn. He said, they used all the tricks they could, flying low, coming in fast, diving from the sun. In fact, some dropped bombs on us before attempting the suicide run, and all of them strafed us. At 0845, another Judy came in at Laffey from her port beam. Thus far, the ship had been very, very lucky. She had been attacked by 8 kamikazes and had shot down or near missed all 8. Her luck had been good, her maneuvering perfect, and her gunnery excellent. Something had to change, and unfortunately, luck was what was going to change. Lieutenant Joel C. Youngquist checked the men on his 40 millimeter and 20 millimeter gun crews, one level above gunner's mate Larry Delusky's 5-inch gun on the main deck. But Seaman Tom Fern and the other men had opened fire almost as soon as the kamikaze was spotted. Fern and his companions stood their ground, exposed to the bullets pinging around them, and battled the instinct to crouch below the waist-high shield as the plane bore in. while Becton executed frequent course changes to keep the plane away from the ship's vital midsection, Lieutenant Frank Manson watched the Kamikaze, uncertain whether it would veer toward the bridge and him or plunge directly into Youngquist's gun. Survival at this moment relied on those port side 40 millimeter and 20 millimeter guns, the ship's last line of defense, to knock down the plane. Quote, "You know he's going to die. You pray he won't take you with him," Manson said. "You're up against desperation and fanaticism that leaves you cold all over," unquote. Manson had witnessed other suicide attacks in the Philippines, but this was, he called it, blood-chilling. They have a kind of insanity that makes more war horrible than it's ever been before, Seth.
It's hard to fathom. It really is. It's truly hard to fathom. Even when you see the footage of these things coming in, it's hard to believe that there is a man driving that airplane. And we've talked about kamikazes for the last, 4 or 5 episodes now, but it's still, it's hard to wrap your brain around it that there is a man driving that airplane with a sole intent to not only kill you, but himself at the same damn time. It's just hard to believe. It really is. Despite repeated 40 and 20 millimeter hits, the Judy just missed the port motor whaleboat and then crashed into the two 20 millimeter mounts. These are Group 23 on the starboard side, abaft the after stack, spewing flaming avgas, destroying the guns and killing 3 gunners outright, while a 4th jumped over the side in flames. The fire overran the two 40 millimeter quad mounts, mounts 43 and 44, on top of the after deck house, significantly reducing Laffey's defensive firepower. The impact spread gasoline over the adjoining area. Flammable material flooded Youngquist's gun mounts on the superstructure deck 8 feet above the main deck and quickly ignited, engulfing men and equipment in a conflagration. Youngquist's Mount 44 and his 20 millimeter guns were knocked out of commission, and Seaman First Class Ramon Pressburger's Mount 43, directly across the starboard side, was badly damaged by the same flames. The flames cooked off ammunition resting near the 40 and 20 millimeter guns, creating what they called a fireworks display that punctured hundreds of holes in the superstructure deck. Gasoline, avgas, and flames quickly poured through those very same holes into the handling room below Mount 44, threatening to ignite the store of explosives earmarked for Youngquist gunners that would have torn this ship apart, Bill. The conflagration spread into the men's quarters, and a washroom below deck burned or severed electrical cables and created noxious gases that raced through the venting system into the engine room. So this is a significant impact. I mean, the men are, eviscerated on top of the deck, but this is something that could cause ship threatening damage, Bill.
It sure is. A fire and crippled Laffey made an inviting target for the Kamikaze number 10, another Val. Coming in low from astern, the Val was hit repeatedly by 20 and 40 millimeter fire, but still came on, crashing into the after 20 millimeter mounts on the fantail of the destroyer. Before he did, however, the 20 millimeter gunners stood at their posts and fired gamely as the Kamikaze zoomed towards them, with the pilot answering their machine gun fire with his own machine gun fire. Japanese slugs clanged against mount shields and deck, while the American 20s tore off pieces of the Val, but the suicide-bent pilot barged through the hail of bullets and the smoke from the preceding Kamikaze to smack directly into Radyman Lawrence Kelly and the others. Some of those kids have more damn guts, said the ship's executive officer, Lieutenant McCune of the ship's gunners. They stayed right in that gun mount and kept firing, he said. Like everyone else aboard Laffey, McCune hoped Laffey could avoid further harm. But he said, it just doesn't make any difference how good they are. You just can't get them all, unquote. The Kamikaze destroyed all 3 stations and killed 6 men instantly before hitting the corner of Mount 53, 5-inch mount, and spraying the after end of the ship with flaming avgas. The bomb then exploded, starting a major fire that threatened the after magazine. Becton immediately ordered the magazine flooded, but now Laffey was slower and less maneuverable. The 11th Kamikaze, another Val, came in from the sun, astern, and dropped his bomb that smacked into Laffey just at the edge of the deck by Mount 53. The plane then crashed into Dulewski's Mount 53, destroying the weapon system entirely while killing 6 more men inside the mount. Seth, what's left here?
Not a whole hell of a lot. Not a whole hell of a lot. So, there's not a lot left of Laffey. And this, again, to impress this, this is a destroyer. This isn't a battleship. This isn't New Mexico. This isn't Washington. This isn't the Essex or the Enterprise or hell, even, the USS Baltimore. This isn't a heavy, this is a DD. And this is a smaller, it's not a rowboat, but I mean, it's a small ship. This is not a big ship. And DDs are called tin cans for a reason. The thin armor on these things are not built to withstand this kind of punishment. And the fact that this ship is just absorbing tremendous punishment, and I'll show some of the pictures later of the damage. I mean, it is startling when you see this. And this is a destroyer that has taken this kind of punishment. And Bill, as you know, on a smaller naval vessel, all the crew is, they're compact and they're tight.
Yeah.
So when something gets hit, it's not just 1 or 2 dudes that gets hit. It's a lot of guys that get hit.
Well,
and that's the important thing to note. Go ahead.
Yeah, and to that point, Seth, you don't have a lot of depth, right, in your
Right.
crew, right? You've got 3, 4, 5 guys that are trained to do, any one thing, and it's not like you've got 1,000 guys to draw from.
Right.
So when you lose them, everybody's, you lose a lot of capability.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the key here. So less than 2 minutes after this devastating hit, and that's exactly what it was that you just described, Bill, on her stern, another Val came in from astern and dropped a bomb that hit the ship on the starboard quarter just above the prop guard. Although taken under fire by the 20s in Group 24, the plane kept on coming. The bomb exploded in the 20 millimeter in the after 20 millimeter magazine, which is never a good thing, and fragments ruptured hydraulic lines in the steering gear and jammed the rudder at 26 degrees to port. The solitary bomb that this thing dropped caused astounding damage inside this little DD. Again, this goes back to what we were talking about. This in a battle wagon, you're not designed to take this kind of punishment. The bomb punctured a 7-foot hole in the deck, 3 feet inboard of the ship's edge, twisting the main deck upwards. In the process, it ignited fires and added fuel to those already ablaze, where DC personnel battled, quote, raging fires dangerously near the after magazine, unquote. Every gun aft of the ship's number 2 stack had now been knocked out of action. Again, every weapon aft of the number 2 funnel on USS Laffey was kaput. They were out of action, Bill.
Yeah, and so you've got the rudder jammed, and oftentimes because you lose hydraulics. After steering auxiliary steering is normally in the stern below decks, right? And so now the stern is all messed up. What's happening to auxiliary steering? Can you regain control of this rudder? Or are you going to be in a very predictable turn to port the entire time you're underway? Now the bomb burst through the opening. Let's see.
Yeah, you're right. The bomb burst.
That's right. Yep. Why did I lose my place anyway? The bomb burst through the opening in the main deck to explode in the 20 millimeter magazine, where fires speedily engulfed crew's quarters and storage areas. The force of the explosion thrust pieces of bunks and bulkheads from the ship's interior upward and out through hatches, raining deadly shrapnel onto the deck and crew. Shrapnel below decks ruptured or pierced the bulkheads of 7 adjoining compartments, including the steering gear motor room, this is what I'm just talking about, the carpenter's room, and the steering gear room. The bomb's explosion ripped bulkheads from hinges, threatened the ammunition storage areas, and produced thick smoke that hampered damage control operations. Bomb fragments penetrated both the ship's deck and skin, allowing water to gush through and flood the aft end. After this hit, Laffey steamed in a tight circle because of the jammed rudder, with only acceleration and deceleration as means to disrupt Japanese aim. Down by the stern, Laffey was battered and broken, but she was far from dead. However, her defensive firepower was seriously lacking. Mount 53 and 40 millimeter mounts 43 and 44 were out of action, along with 5 20 millimeter mounts destroyed, all on her stern. Becton said, "We weren't a sitting duck, but we sure felt like one."
Yeah. And the two things kept Laffey safe before this series of devastating hits, and that was Becton's maneuvering and her defensive firepower. And now both of those things are gone. He can't maneuver if she's just doing this. So yeah, it's not a good situation here. So Becton needed to know what was going on aft because he's up on the bridge. He's only seeing what's in front of him and around him. He's not looking behind him. He just knows they've been hit, and he needs to know how badly they've been hit behind him. So bereft of any kind of communications to that part of his ship for obvious reasons, he sent Ari Fatridis to go see what was up and report back. The sights that Ari saw stayed with him for the rest of his life. Quote, "I saw a shipmate. He was burned to a crisp. His hands and arms covered his face like he was shielding himself from his fate. He looked like charcoal, and he wasn't the last that I saw." Moving further aft, Ari came across pieces of debris everywhere. He said, and I quote, "Everywhere I stepped, I had to step over some sort of junk, pieces of planes, pieces of the ship, and pieces of people. I thought it was horrible until I got to the stern." He continues, and this is directly from his oral history he did with me. Quote, "The 20 millimeter mounts on the stern were gone, just wiped out. What little was left was almost unrecognizable. There was a man still in his straps on one of the guns. He was still alive, hanging from the straps with no legs, bleeding out. He was begging me, 'Please get me out of these straps.' I ran towards him, but in the seconds it took me to get there, he died." Clusters of bodies lay in grotesque poses all around the ship's stern. The guns were burned, blackened, and twisted. Holes were all through the deck, and there were wounded and dead everywhere. As he went back forward, Ari passed a cluster of what had once been men. He assumed they had once been a DC party, but now there were just pieces of men scattered all over the ship's bulkhead. Boutrides then informed Becton of what he saw and stood beside his skipper. For obvious reasons, we're not going to show any imagery of kamikaze victims, although it is out there. And I strongly advise you only look at it if you have a strong stomach, because it is absolutely horrible. But this is the results of kamikaze attacks, Bill.
Yeah, that's right. The Laffey situation at this point, as bad as it was, could have been worse if it had not been for the FM-2 Wildcats that had just arrived from USS Shamrock Bay. The 4 Wildcats were engaged. Now, these aren't Hellcats. These are Wildcats. We're engaging over 20 Japanese aircraft of various types, led by Lieutenant J.G. Carl J. Riemann. Riemann rolled in on a Val that jinked and was then shot down by Riemann's wingman, Dick Collier. Riemann then shot down a Val and subsequently fired on a Kate torpedo bomber, killing the pilot and sending him down. He then hit another Kate with the last of his ammunition, and as he followed the plane down to see if it would crash, an F-4U Corsair came in and helped finish it off. Some of the fighters continued to make attempts to scatter the Japanese, even though they were out of ammunition. Not counting Riemann's last Kate, which he didn't claim. The four Wildcats accounted for 6 Japanese aircraft before they had to break off, low on fuel and ammunition again, leaving Laffey alone. Far from finished, the Japanese still came in at Laffey with Kamikazes 13 through 17, Seth.
Unbelievable. 17 kamikazes coming in on one ship. And yes, Laffey had help, but they're coming for one gal right there. So 2 kamikaze in quick succession came in from the now vulnerable, port quarter. The first one, yet another Val, crashed into the after deck house of USS Laffey as damage control parties were fighting the fires in that location. Moments later, a Judy crashed into almost the same spot in a huge ball of fire, killing 4 crewmen and starting yet another major gasoline fire. About this point, somewhere around this time, 12 United States Marine Corps F-4U Corsairs from VMF 441, the Blackjacks, launched from Yantan Airfield on Okinawa and joined the fray. They get there quick, shooting down between 15 and 17 Japanese aircraft in the vicinity of Laffey. The Marine Corsairs performed heroically, often pursuing the Japanese aircraft into Laffey's own anti-aircraft fire, what little of it there remained. A Ki-43 Oscar fighter came in at Laffey from the port side on a strafing run with a Corsair in hot pursuit. Gunners on Laffey tried to shoot down the Oscar without hitting the Corsair, which is almost impossible. The Oscar hit the destroyer's mast with its wing, carried away the port yardarm and the U.S. ensign, struggled to gain altitude, but then crashed in the water on the starboard side of Laffey. The pursuing Corsair hit Laffey's SC air search radar and knocked it down. The damaged F-4U was able to gain enough altitude so the pilot could roll the plane over and bail out before the aircraft went down. Pilot was rescued by LCSL 51. For the remainder of her ordeal, Laffey was attacked by an additional 5 aircraft, bringing the total to 22 of individual attacks on the U.S. destroyer. In these attacks, she suffered 1 near miss and 2 additional bomb hits. At 0947, the final attacker came in, number 22, pursued by an F-4U Corsair that shot it down. Any additional attacks on Laffey and her consorts were thwarted by the now heavy presence of combat air patrol from USS Intrepid and VF-10, Bill.
This is a ship that will not die. Down by the stern and still afire, Becton's ship was in dire straits and almost defenseless. The elevating mechanism, Mount 51, had a break in its hydraulic line and had to be elevated manually. This is hard work, folks.
Yeah.
Mount 52 had no electrical power and had to be trained and elevated manually. The 40-millimeter twin mounts 41 and 42 were undamaged, and the quad mount 43 had been remanned after fires had been beaten back. But electrical power to the directors was knocked out, and all were operating in degraded mode, basically self-targeting. 4 of the 11 20-millimeter guns, all on the port side, were still operating. The air search and surface search radars were all destroyed, but she was still afloat. After the 80-minute battle, which for the men seemed like an eternity, the skies were clear. LCS 51 came alongside to render assistance to the battered destroyer and help put out her fires. The little ship had been hit too, but was nowhere near as bad off as Laffey was. In all, Laffey shot down or damaged 14 kamikazes of the 22 that attacked her. She had taken a beating in the process, though. She had taken 4 direct hits from bombs, 2 near misses, and taken 6 kamikaze hits. Now she was still afloat. How she was still afloat was anyone's guess. 32 of her crew were dead, and an additional 71 wounded. My goodness, Seth. 6 bomb hits. How many? 6 kamikaze hits. 4 bomb hits. 2 near misses on a destroyer.
On a freaking destroyer.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
That kind of damage would put a battle wagon out of service for a while. I mean, seriously, that's 6 airplanes that are going to hit you, 4 bombs, 2 near misses that, as we've talked about 100 times, a near miss can sometimes be fatal, rupturing
Yep.
hull plates and whatever the case may be. So, I mean, this thing is taking a freaking pounding. And again, I mean, that kind of damage to a heavy cruiser or a battle wagon, or certainly a carrier, that's going to put this thing out of action. Yet this little girl is still kicking around. USS Macomb, DMS 23, took Laffey in tow. Now remember, she's steaming in a circle. She can't go anywhere, really. I mean, she's just
Mhm.
going in a circle. She took USS Macomb takes Laffey in tow and dragged her stern first to Karamaretto. After temporary repairs were performed to Laffey's rudder and some holes were patched, the ship left under her own power, headed for Saipan, Pearl Harbor, and then eventually Seattle. Not surprisingly, Laffey's crew was well decorated for their fight. Commander Becton and Ensign Robert Thompson were awarded the Navy Cross. Thompson's award was a posthumous one. 6 silver stars were handed out, 18 bronze stars, and a letter of Navy commendation. LCS 51 CO Lieutenant Howell Chickering, the gentleman you talked about earlier, Bill, was also awarded a Navy Cross, and his ship was given credit for downing 6 aircraft in the melee. Again, LCS 51 downing 6 aircraft in this incredible fight at Radar Picket 1.
Yeah.
Laffey and her crew were awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, and it reads like this, quote, for extraordinary heroism in action as a picket ship on Radar Picket Station number 1 during an attack by approximately 30 enemy Japanese planes 30 miles northwest of the northern tip of Okinawa on 16 April 1945. Fighting her guns valiantly against waves of hostile suicide aircraft plunging toward her from all directions, the USS Laffey sent up relentless barrages of anti-aircraft fire during an extremely heavy and concentrated air attack. Repeatedly finding her targets, she shot down 8 enemy planes clear of the ship and damaged 6 more before they crashed on board. Struck by 2 bombs, crash dived by suicide planes, and frequently strafed, she withstood the devastating blows unflinchingly and, despite severe damage and heavy casualties, continued to fight effectively against insurmountable odds. And her brilliant performance in this action reflects highest credit upon herself and the United States Naval Service. Yes, the numbers in that Presidential Unit Citation are different than her actual numbers. The numbers that Bill stated earlier, which were, and I quote, 4 direct hits from bombs, 2 near misses, and 6 kamikaze hits, as well as shooting down 14 of the 22 aircraft. Those are the accurate numbers. The citation was written immediately after the action. Post-war analysis and recent scholarship gives her credit for a lot more than what the citation says. So, Bill, you would think that after taking a pounding like she did, that, and this happened to a lot of destroyers and other, minesweepers and mine layers and other things that take a beating like this, although few took a beating quite like this. But
Mhm.
when they get back to the United States or even there at Karamaretto, they're scrapped. That's it. They're done. Laffey's not one
Yeah,
of
of
those
course,
ships.
because there's no way they could put this ship back together, right? So
Mm,
on June 30th, 1947, Laffey was decommissioned after the war was over, obviously, and placed in the reserve fleet. She was she was repaired before that time, but she was recommissioned in 51 for the Korean War. She earned 2 battle stars during the Korean War, and 62 underwent what's called FRAM 2 upgrade, fleet rehabilitation and modernization. That's a conversion. By the way, there are a bunch of FRAM destroyers still in service when I was in the Navy. Yeah, I'm old. And served in the Atlantic Fleet until decommissioned when I was a plebe in 1975. So this ship lasted until I was a plebe at the Naval Academy. Incredible. The gallant Laffey, the only surviving Sumner-class destroyer in North America, remains afloat today. Berthed since 1981 at Patriots Point Naval and Maritime Museum in Charleston, South Carolina, along with the carrier USS Yorktown CV-10, commissioned in 1943. As for Commander Becton, he had a long career after the war. He went on to serve in multiple assignments, never got another ship shot out from under him,
mm,
including as executive officer of the light cruiser USS Manchester, CL 83, and as commanding officer of the attack transport Glenn, APA 239, battleship Iowa, BB 61, Cruiser Division 5, that's a flag assignment, folks, and Mine Force Pacific Fleet. He was promoted Rear Admiral in 1955 and retired in 56, in 1966 as the Navy's Inspector General, a very important assignment. So he had a distinguished career. A lot of guys that go through this kind of combat, Seth, aren't the same afterwards. It sounded like he handled it pretty well.
He did, from all accounts, and he was, again, he's one of those guys that, as I said before, the crew thought he walked on water. And after the war, for the most part, most of them stayed in touch with Becton. And he was always glad to see, above all, and by the way, he wrote a book called, appropriately, The Ship That Would Not Die. F. Julian Becton did. It's available. It's an old book. You can probably find it on eBay or Libris or something like that, or Abe Books or whatever, but it's there. I have it over here. But he always said that he was always glad to see his Laffey crew. And above all the crews that he served with throughout his entire long naval career, the Laffey crew was always nearest and dearest to his heart. And for obvious reasons, because they went through hell together. And Laffey always had reunions. She was one of those ships that had reunions long, long after the war. Hell, even when I was knowing these guys, they were still having reunions. And towards the end, I thought this was super cool. Like you said, Bill, Laffey is still afloat. She's at Patriots Point. And Ari Fatridis and several members of Laffey's surviving crew every summer would get together aboard their ship and hold their reunion aboard their ship, which is just freaking cool. And all these old fellas would have working parties to help preserve their old ship, which is just amazing to me. The love they
Yeah.
had for that vessel, it did not end until the last crewman passed away. And unfortunately, I don't know if the last crewman is, I don't know. All the guys that I knew, unfortunately, are gone. But it's a living memorial to Commander Becton, or Admiral Becton, and all of the crew, that ship is still afloat and in damn good shape. She's in good shape.
Mhm.
So it's really, really cool, in my opinion. There's aren't too many
Yeah.
ships, crews that can point to that.
Yeah. Road trip, Seth, on the Yorktown on the Laffey, do an
I,
episode up there.
heck
You
yeah,
Charleston folks, you lean on us if you want that to happen. It's further for you than it is for me, but it would be a great time.
it would be a good time. It would be a good time. That would be a lot of fun. I always loved visiting ship museums, and I mean, we did it. My son and I did to North Carolina this past summer, and that was amazing. And we've
Mhm.
been aboard the Alabama a gazillion times, and the Drum, and the Destroyer Kid. So this is definitely a road
Mhm.
trip in the future, I think.
Good.
All right. Well, Bill, this is one of those, people have asked us to do radar picket stories, and you and I knew that they were coming, but this is the last one, because we could go on. Hell, we could make an entire season out of the stories at the radar picket stations, because they're all incredible. They really truly are. But the one from last week, USS Hugh Hadley and USS Evans, and this one this week, USS Laffey, those are legendary stories among the many legendary stories at the radar picket stations off of Okinawa. So, this will more than likely conclude our Kamikaze specials. But
Mhm.
this is a story that we had to tell, Bill. We had to tell Laffey's story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this episode's going to air sometime before Christmas. And, it just, we may do something a little special for Christmas, but it reminds me of celebrating Christmas aboard ship. It was always a very kind of somber, almost, I would say bittersweet, more bitter than sweet.
Mhm.
But I can imagine these guys, some Christmas a long time ago, listening to that song, Seth, that I hope you'll play at the outro of this episode.
I think I can do that. I think I can do that.
All right.
All right. Well, Bill, is there anything else you want to add?
That's it.
All right, well, let's wrap this sucker up. So with that, we want to thank you very much for listening in on our conversation. Please subscribe to the Unauthorized History of the Pacific War podcast, wherever you receive your podcast. Give us a rating and review. We do appreciate it. If you have a question or comment, send us an email at unauthorizedpacificpodcast@gmail.com. So once again, my name is Seth Parrott, and I want to thank you very much for listening and or watching. Bill, bring us home.
And I'm Bill Tody. See you again next week.